All right, so hello everyone. My name is Michael Guerin, and I will be the host for today's panel discussion on weather misinformation on the internet. I'm joined by our two panelists. We have Matt Lanza, the lead meteorologist at Cheniere Energy. I think I might have butchered that again. um,
Cheniere.
Cheniere, yes, sorry. And Dr. Decker, professor at meteorology at Rutgers University. Some of you in the class there might know him. um, So I'd like to thank you both for taking some time to be here today to discuss this very important issue. So without further ado, our first question in the panel is going to go to Dr. Decker, and the question is: why is misinformation of weather and climate on the internet and in general a problem?
Well, it's a problem because if people are going to the internet for their information and they're misinformed about what's going on with the weather or the climate, they may make poor decisions, may put their lives in danger in some cases. As scientists, we're hoping that the latest and greatest and our best, knowledge of how the weather or the climate is working gets communicated to the public so the public can make the best decisions. So any misinformation or disinformation just gets in the way of that communication process. So that's definitely a problem.
Right, and Matt, same question to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in our case down here, from what I've seen, it's all about misinformation more so than disinformation. One of the biggest problems and one of the biggest headaches is in the last 20 years or so, a lot of weather model data, just raw model data, has been, it's all been democratized, which is great. So anybody can access it. A lot of it, most of it now is free. Even the Euro is free. On most sites, you get a lot of data, and all of this is great, but it just means that anybody can look at any one model and throw it out there and be like, oh my God, look at this hurricane going for Miami on whatever. But there's no context involved. And so, from our vantage point, here in Houston, we had the problem of having, a lot of floods. And, obviously during hurricane season, we're a prime target. I think that there's something built into the GFS code that kind of makes us a magnet on day 16 in May and October every year. So just getting and dealing with that is really hard, and it's tough because down here a lot of people are I don't want to say traumatized necessarily, but we've had a lot of disasters, so people are very much on edge still. Anytime you get anything serious, so trying to keep people's nerves in check, trying to prevent them from worrying needlessly, that's one big problem that we have. And then obviously, as Dr. Decker said, if you're just not getting the right information, you're not going to be prepared when the time comes, when a storm actually hits. And one of the biggest concerns I have is that you just constantly throw all this, bombastic stuff at people. After a while, they're going to tune out and they're just going to use their apps on their phone. And that's not good in places where you need context, especially.
Yeah, and I'll add in too that the issue I have is that a lot of times people will go to the wrong source, and I'm kind of getting ahead on for the next question here, but they'll go to the wrong source for weather. They'll go to TikTok or Twitter and go find the most sensational thing they can find, or whatever's on their timeline or their feed or whatever, and that's the information they choose. And that's, I'm going to say 99 of 100 times, that's probably not going to be very good information that you're getting there. It's going to end up being either sensationalized or just, in the worst case, flat out wrong, which can be even more dangerous just because, after a while, it's going to end up being the boy who cried wolf. If somebody's sensationalizing every single GFS run, which, I mean, heck, there's probably one today that had a 384 hurricane or a blizzard or something crazy going on somewhere. And if you show too many of those, eventually people are going to be like, that's never going to happen. And then eventually one will happen, and they're not going to be ready for it because they're listening to some random person rather than a reliable source. And I'll pivot that into our next question. This one we'll have Matt start with this one. In your experience, what are the most reliable sources for weather information, and what are the least reliable sources for weather information?
So I had an interesting because I joined TikTok this year when we started our new hurricane website down here called the iWall, and that was a mistake for my sanity. You had Category 6 Florida woman on there, in addition to all the other random stuff that I just can't even begin to describe. I think somebody needs to write a book about the evolution of which social media platform is the worst for weather misinformation, because it's gone, from Facebook to Twitter to YouTube to now TikTok. So the problem with social media is that there's a lot of really, really good information out there, and there's a lot of people doing really, really good stuff. But it gets lost in the stuff that's, sexier. And, Category 6 Florida woman is obviously going to get more attention than the person giving the sober analysis of the model run. It's just how it is. But so you have to find that right balance. This is kind of getting onto a tangent, but if you're presenting information in that format, you got to find the right balance of keeping your audience engaged, but also, being factual and keeping information with them. Because what I tell people is you always have to vet your source, and you always have to look if there's a Facebook page that posts something that is whatever, calling for a hurricane on day 10. Okay, no, number one, but number two, more importantly, find out who they are. Like, if you can't find any information about who these people are, then quite frankly, they're not good. So it's always one of the jobs we have now as meteorologists is we have to educate people about this. And I think we're seeing that with news consumers as well. You have to educate everybody to know what a trustworthy source is. So, whenever I go talk to groups or whatever, I always talk about social media. I talk about the one-off model runs that show the crazy scenario. If it looks crazy, it probably is. But I also tell people, look, the worst case scenario, which is not the worst case scenario, but to go to weather.gov or hurricane.gov, whatever, National Weather Service is going to get you whatever you need. And it's going to be as close to what is reliable as anything. And that just, when all else fails, go to that. I know it's not the most, the website's a little, I don't want to say dated, but it's not the most, dynamic website in the world, but the information is as good as it gets. So that's kind of where I point people most of the time for good information. But if you're using social media, yeah, you could find some good information, but you could also find some really, really bad information.
Right. And Dr. Decker, same question to you. What are the most reliable sources and what are the least reliable?
Right. So I have yet to subject myself to TikTok, so I can't comment on that whole side of things. I agree with Matt. It's like, you have to find the wheat among all the chaff on social media in particular. There's so much bad stuff, just wrong stuff, but there's lots of great stuff too if you know who to follow and who not to follow. So the challenge is for, I'm a meteorologist, so I can tell what's the good stuff and what's the bad stuff. But a member of the general public isn't necessarily going to know if just taking a quick look at a particular message, is this a legitimate message or not? So I agree with Matt, being trained in how to sort of vet those sources and determine what's a good source of information, what's a bad source of information. Maybe, I know AMS has a new digital meteorologists program that's just starting up, and maybe at some point I can point people to say, look for that digital meteorologist seal. And if you see that, that's a good source of information. If you don't see it, it's questionable. Right now, I don't point, when people ask me, where do I go for my weather information? I don't say social media at all. I say weather.gov, right? That's the place to go for just the basic information about what the forecast is, what weather events might be happening in the near term. So that's what I do.
Yeah, and sorry, Matt, did you want to add something?
No, I was gonna add something that may be relevant, I think, to students too. So I followed a few accounts on TikTok of meteorologists or student meteorologists, students that are still pursuing their degree. And I mean, quite honestly, some of the information they provide is better than some of the professionals, like professional meteorologists that are in broadcasting or whatever. So, I'm not necessarily going to encourage any student to do this, but I'm not going to discourage you either. If you want to, work on your weather communication skills, you can do it on there. And I'm a big believer in flooding the zone with good information, because the more good information that's out there, the better. And most students, from what I've been able to tell, tend to they're not going to go swinging like crazy, too far from what the National Weather Service says. So, I mean, if you're looking for something, like, maybe it's something to consider to practice your communication abilities, is to have a TikTok page dedicated to weather or something like that. If that's your thing, maybe it's not. I don't know, but it's just something I figure to throw out there.
Yeah, and I want to also kind of highlight something Dr. Decker said about, we're all meteorologists, so we see the bad information. We see that hour 384 GFS, and we're like, okay, we know that's nonsense. But the other people, they don't know that. Odds are good that 99 out of 100 people, they'll see that if they're not meteorologists, and they'll think, oh, that must be a real forecast. But it's not. And that's kind of the purpose of, the whole purpose of why we're even doing this panel in the first place, is for people like that, to try to combat the disinformation for them, so that they don't get fooled by, what did you say, or Cat 6 Hurricane Florida lady or whatever her name was, and instead they're listening to real sources like weather.gov, or the various National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center, NOAA, etc. Or if they want to get their information on TikTok, the couple of good sources that Matt listed, or if they want to go get their weather on Twitter, they can go to iWall. I think you also have, I forget your other, is it Houston Chronicle?
Space City Weather.
Space City Weather. That's it. Yeah. So that either of those, there's plenty of places like that on Twitter. You just have to find them, and that's part of the problem here. And that's getting ahead of myself on that. And so let's keep rolling. So what is, and then this one I'll give to Dr. Decker, and if you don't have a worst, I'm gonna ask you about your worst weather misinformation experience, and if you don't have one, that's okay. You can,
I've got
maybe
one.
somebody. Okay. So what's your worst weather misinformation experience, and how do you personally deal with weather misinformation on the internet or otherwise?
Right. So this was I can't remember the name of the hurricane. I'm blanking on it, but the one that went up towards the Bay of Fundy, Nova Scotia, far eastern Maine. Lee. There we go. Thank you. So as it was approaching, making that landfall so I do have a personal Twitter account, but I don't use it. But I do run the meteorology program's Twitter account, and so I occasionally log in to see if there's anything I want to retweet, if that's still the phrase that's used, or just post something, some information about the meteorology program. And so, when you log in, you get just a combination of things that you follow, but also just random things will pop up according to the algorithm that says this should be something interesting to you, meteorology program. And so one thing that popped right up one time when I logged in was someone had written, like, expect 30-foot storm surge into eastern Maine, something like that. As Lee comes ahead, it's catastrophic flooding. I was like, what is this? I didn't recognize the source. I'm not sure how they came up with it, or if they're just making stuff up. I'm trying to figure out, how did they misinterpret? Is there a way you could have misinterpreted the official forecasts to actually say this? I couldn't figure it out. So I ignored it, right? Because I knew that was completely bonkers. And that's, generally, when I am consuming weather information, if it's bad information, I don't comment and say this is wrong. I don't bother with something like that. I just ignore it. I move on to the ones that are good information. I also have, every winter, as Matt alluded to, here in New Jersey, it's more likely to be the 2-foot snowstorm at hour 384 as opposed to the hurricane at hour 384. But I will see either in Twitter or in various Facebook feeds, someone posting about the big blizzard we're going to get in 2 weeks, according to this one image. Yeah.
Something I sometimes look forward to, hoping that one time it'll be right. But Matt, same question to you. Worst weather misinformation experience, and how do you personally deal with it?
Yeah, blind squirrel catches a nut every now and then, right? So I think one of the biggest problems we had down here during Hurricane Harvey, there was one or two runs of the GFS of the year. I forget which one it was now, but for those that don't remember, Harvey exploded into a Category 4 hurricane, came ashore in South Texas near Corpus Christi, and then just kind of meandered for 5 days up the Texas coast, briefly offshore, and then back into Louisiana. And that's why Houston, got 50 inches of rain. And in the forecast lead up to that, there were a couple runs of models that showed Harvey going back offshore and strengthening, and then coming right back into Houston. It was still the most bizarre storm I've ever seen, and hope to never see again. But there were a lot of people that were focused on that. And if you looked at anything other than operational model guidance, you could very clearly see that there was no support for that. That was a really strange scenario. It was unlikely to verify, but it caught the attention of a couple of prominent people that were either not meteorologists and a couple that were, that have pretty loud megaphones, and they would talk about that. And one of the biggest things that I hate that some people do, that are meteorologists, by the way, is they will post a model map and they will say not a forecast, except it is a forecast. It's not their forecast, but they're sharing it anyway. Don't do that. Whatever you do, please don't do that. It drives me crazy. So people would post that and it'd be like, oh, Harvey's going to back offshore and come back on and strengthen. And not only are you going to flood, you're going to have a hurricane too. And it's like, no, that's not going to happen. And it's like, we have enough to worry about right now. Let's not put all this fantasy stuff out there for us to deal with. So that was a really big problem. And ultimately Harvey did go back offshore, did re-strengthen into a tropical storm, but like a 40-mile-an-hour one. And the wind wasn't an issue at all. I don't think anybody lost power from Harvey in the Houston area. But one of the other problems we had with Harvey was somebody circulated a post that they claimed to have been from an official government agency down here that was talking about all the rain we were going to get, and just describing in very great detail what was going to happen. That certain very specific roads were going to be washed out or flooded, and very specific buildings were going to be destroyed, all this stuff. But it got spread widely because people were kind of in panic mode ahead of Harvey as it was. So stuff like that easily just takes off. And, I even had the CEO of our company come to me and show me this, and was like, well, what is this? And I'm like, oh, that's garbage. Now, as it turns out, some of it actually did come true. But the reality was nobody knew this ahead of time. So it kind of poses a challenge, for us ahead of time, that's not a weather problem, right? That is a totally different problem, but people are still coming to you as the meteorologist and saying, hey, what is this? What aren't you telling us? No, I'm telling you everything I know. And so you have to learn how to deal with that too. So it's really, like I said at the beginning, the misinformation is, I don't know if it's misinformation or disinformation or what it is, but it's not good quality information, and it's not necessarily wrong, but it's just not accurately contexted or accurately contextualized or whatever. So that to me has been, I think, the biggest struggle that we've had to deal with, and definitely had a couple of issues with that in the run up to Harvey, when you're already stressed and spread thin as it is.
Yeah, I think a good analogy for what you said, to kind of explain it to a normal person that doesn't understand all the meteorology terms would be, I'll use let's say a football term, like, oh, the Houston Texans have 20 wins, but obviously you leave out the part that's over the last, let's say, 10 years or whatever. So that'd be like yes, essentially would be 2 wins a season. Be essentially 2 wins a season, but the only thing that person hears is, oh, they have 20 wins. And that's the problem here too, is they hear, oh, death and destruction or whatever on this particular run, or this model shows doom and destruction as well, and could it happen? Yes. It's not totally impossible that this hurricane could hit Cat 5 strength at some point. Is it likely? Probably not. It happens occasionally, but Category 5s aren't all that common. And same deal with the fantasy blizzards on at hour 384 on the GFS. Is that going to happen? Probably not. If it does, great for everybody in New Jersey, but you know, it's not likely to happen. But could it still? Yes, of course, it could still. Any weather event at 16 days, mostly. I don't want to say every weather. That might be a little bit much, but most weather events at the hour 384 on the GFS, and I'm just going to keep using that example because it's everybody knows that one. um, is it likely to happen? No, of course not. But can it? Yes. But that's the thing that where people get hung up on a lot is they don't know the difference between it can happen and it's going to happen in terms of weather, and that's kind of where it gets tricky. And you know, I'll toss in my own personal anecdote. I actually, Dr. Decker, I think I actually saw the same video with the weird wave height anomalies in the Atlantic Ocean, and it kind of reminded me of the Day After Tomorrow movie with like the super storms in the middle of the country. And my my friend, he lives out in Massachusetts, and he was asking me, "Is this real?" And I was like, "No. Why would?" He was telling me, you know, essentially that you know, is this big storm is going to hit, and I'm like, I don't. It's going to, you know, you might get an outer band of rain or something where you are, but nothing that crazy. Like that's I don't even know what that was. And you know, I was telling Matt before we got on another story, another group of friends I know down in Jacksonville, Florida. They were worried about, I forget which hurricane hit Florida this year. I'm really bad with the names, but whichever hurricane that was, you know, there was one model run, I think it was a GFS or one of the goofy hurricane models, that it had it recurving out into the Atlantic Ocean, like re-strengthening to Cat 3-ish, and then slamming back into Jacksonville. And they were worried about that. And I was like, no, that's the odds of that happening are astronomical. That's not going to happen. Uh, and you know, it just highlights though that, you know, they know I'm a meteorologist, and they, instead of you know, asking me like, hey, do I need to worry about this storm, they decided to trust the internet. And I think that kind of speaks you know, a little bit of volume to that. You know, people are more willing to trust the internet than, you know, a meteorologist, or I guess in my case a friend. You know, and I think that is kind of, you know, a difficult barrier to overcome as well. That, you know, we have to compete with all these sensationalists and all these TikTok stars and influencers or whatever they call them these days, and Twitter, and nobody really uses Facebook all that much anymore, I think, but or is it Meta now? um, and you know, we're not, but as a rule, I don't think any of us here would consider ourselves, you know, a sensationalist or anything, or a big TikTok or Twitter personality. And we have to compete with people that are, and it's difficult. And you know, I think you know, calling back to what Matt said earlier, that, you know, getting more of the good information out there to try to combat all the bad information is probably you know, one of the big keys here to fighting against, and you know, hopefully ultimately defeating whether, you know, all this misinformation out there. And you know, we've only really hit the weather portions, but this applies to climate too. And you know, I think Matt, I might know who you might have been referring to in the meteorology circle when you referred to some of those people. But um
No, me?
you
No,
know,
of course not.
Yeah.
yeah, Dave.
Hey, can I interject for a second? I
Yeah,
think we're
go ahead.
good on time. I was curious if we could get the class a little bit involved here too. I'm curious what some of the students think on really any of these questions, but in particular, I'm curious, you know, if you guys want to volunteer, you know, where you get your weather information from. You're, you know, looking up a forecast or something like that, what you guys think are the reputable sources, and maybe also some of the other questions too. You know, in terms of, you know, if you've had any kind of bad experience, you know, where you've been sort of maybe misled or something like that, or seen something. Yeah, yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so hello, my name is Matthew. I'm a junior in the program here. I don't know, just one thing you mentioned, like, you know, sensationalists on Twitter, and I love just like scrolling through my feed and seeing people just absolutely like blow things out of proportion. They'll be looking at you know, a forecast that's valid for 16 days out, and it's looking at 72 inches of snow expected for the Northeast, like New Jersey and blah blah blah, and reading through the comments of people just panicking and stuff, it's upsetting almost too, because you're kind of you're in this major to like spread information to help people out and not to spark panic, and you see people on social media like this sparking panic, and it's so frustrating. So I mean, I don't know, like, if you guys, how do you deal with something like that even, or how do you, like, I know, like, you're not going to leave a comment on the page and be like, hey, this is not right, because what is that going to do in reality? But what can you do to, like, if you see something like that, or just, is it just like you're like, dang, that's really unfortunate, you move on and you try to put your own forecast out if you are on like a social media platform?
I can jump in on that if you'd like. That's a good point, because I used to be exactly like that. I used to hate it. It used to drive me crazy. It used to feel kind of like dejecting, like, okay, well, what am I doing? So I'm going to turn it around on you and say that that's actually a great thing for you, because what it does, yeah, okay, they're spreading whatever on social media. It can help to elevate voices that are more reasonable. And I know a lot of times it seems like that doesn't win out. With social media, it's always the most extreme voice that ends up taking it. But what it does is it makes you more valuable, because number one, you can explain why that's not true, or why there's some chance it's true that is misleading or whatever. And you add context to it, to something like that. And number two, I really think it makes you just valuable from like an employment perspective, because people that are the people that are actually hiring meteorologists, that's not going to fly. So what that does is puts someone has a more reasoned voice at an advantage to be hired, or whatever, to do that. So what I found is that I used to hate it, but now I kind of embrace it, almost like, yeah, sure, put your garbage out there, but I'm gonna be over here talking up the real stuff that's going to happen. And I think that has, I mean, that's certainly worked for us with our with Space City Weather here in Houston, which is a great test market for that, because we've had so many extreme weather events in the last 6 or 7 years down here. But I think it's as the frequency of this likely increases with climate change and everything, and I think as we're already seeing, and with people living in places they probably shouldn't be living, this problem is going to get worse and worse, and people are going to want information that's good. Yeah, they'll still listen to that, and but then they'll go to you for, all right, well, what's the real answer? Like people stop for weather information. This has been true every place I have been, every place I've worked, and even what I did as a kid. I didn't just look at one TV station snowfall forecast when that was the only way to get it. I wanted to see channel 3, 6, and 10 in Philly. What are they all saying? People do that. That is just inherently what people will do. So when you see that person on social media that's going crazy, yeah, they're going to shop for that, but then they're going to go to you for the answer, and they're probably going to keep coming back to you. So I would say don't let it discourage you, but view it as an opportunity for you to stand out above the rest of the crowd. That's kind of my positive spin. And maybe I'm living in a bunker that, whatever, that I'm just hunky-dory and life is great. But I truly think that that's the reasonable take.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Anyone want to share? Yeah, I'm curious where you guys get your weather information from. Does anyone want to share that? Like, we heard Dr. Decker and Matt. I think a couple of things you guys mentioned were, hey, NOAA or the weather.gov kind of websites, kind of reputable. And I think another comment that one of you guys made, which I thought was really great, is, hey, if you're on social media, there could be great stuff. There's bad stuff, but there could be great stuff. But like, maybe do like sort of a background check, a quick background check. Like, who's Stephen Decker? Look him up. Okay. I think, versus someone, who's not a professor or, with meteorology. I thought that was a great point too. But yeah, if you guys have any sources that you guys prefer, you just shout it out, say it, whatever.
Pivotal weather.
What's that?
Pivotal weather.
Pivotal weather? Yeah, I'm familiar with that one. Is that for forecast or model data or both? I know that's model data.
I used it a lot for forecasts.
Okay.
Like doing like meta-analysis, like the storm prediction or weather forecast challenge. That was kind of that. And then Trump.
And I'm curious for both of you guys. Sorry, I interrupted. But why do you guys think it's reliable, reputable? What is it about it that gives you confidence?
Honestly, just I like to trust sources that gives you unbiased information. It gives you the Euro, gives you CFS, it gives you basically all the data in plain format without hyping up anything else.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. Anyone else want to jump in? Or we? Yeah.
To add on to what you said, for topical tidbits specifically,
Yeah.
I've used it as well. And I trust it specifically because I have access to not just the GFS or to the Euro, but to other models as well. So apart from having that access to unbiased information, also gives me an opportunity to compare different model types and ultimately compare it to more reputable sources such as NOAA that come to like, okay, so this is the range I could expect for precipitation, temperature, whatever I'm looking for.
Right. Anyone else? Yeah.
So my reading is kind of similar.
Which one?
Tropical
tidbits?
a little bit.
Okay, hold on.
Compare them to each other as a different model. I use it forecasting out there to know to do that. Model data, I specifically like it for forecasting type thing, just because it's not a news station, but will definitely be the most biased possible. Because it's just weather models, it's not attached to any sort of revenue or anything like that. And just being able to compare them against others just for their different forecasts or just people that may be weakness, but in terms of forecasting, aside from Nolan and whether that weather doing with that, I will typically try for one couple different weather patterns. I can look at weather making that very much so kind of contingent of them for a more serious review.
Sense. Anyone else? I'll just, if I can, like, I'll just throw in one other comment from me, because you guys kind of touched on this about, hey, the 384, snowstorm, hurricane, whatever. The one thing that certainly troubled me and that I hope to see things improve on, and I think they have a little bit, but continue to improve on, it's not necessarily terrible to share model runs with context, right? But I think there are some out there, some meteorologists or whatever, who share that information or even make those kind of forecasts because they want to get that 1 in 100 forecast right. They want to be the ones who said, see, I forecasted a 2-foot blizzard in New Jersey 2 weeks ahead, or a Cat 5 hurricane 2 weeks ahead. So, if I say it enough times, and, the one time it happens, everyone's going to look at me and say I'm great. So, you do have to watch for that, for sure. And you do see that, unfortunately, even before the days of social media, but certainly maybe now that's part of the problem. What I'd like to see for those folks who do want to share some of those maybe low, unlikely, low probability events is to share that risk analysis with them, to share context to say, hey, 1 of 100, ensemble members show this, i.e. the risk for this is 1%, or maybe less than 1%. But we're just giving you some of these possible outliers and stuff. And I think if we could do more of that, do a better job with the risk and probabilities of these events, not just like you said, share it and without context, which I think tends to just scare people. I think it would help. It's my 2 cents.
And yeah, I agree with that for sure. There's definitely merit to doing it. Like And it's almost like it's a good opportunity to educate people on extreme weather sometimes. Like if a model does show something that's crazy, even though it may not happen, we'll say like, well, this is how this could happen, but this is why it probably won't happen, or why you really think it is. So I mean, and I think Dave's exactly right. There is this um, want to swing for the fences, and like there are some people out there that are willing to strike out 200 times a year in exchange for hitting a one walk-off home run, which great, but it's really then you get to ride it, and you're like, oh well, so and so has called 30 of the last one blizzards, and it gets really frustrating. It's tough to deal with that sometimes because it does create more work for you. Well, why is this person saying this? So if you're the sober rational meteorologist, you're now forced to get into it, and that's partially why I've kind of embraced it, because I like the horse is out of the barn. Like people are going to continue to do this, so there's no going back to the days where that stuff was locked up and nobody talked about it. It's just part of life now. So the sooner you get used to it, the better.
And something I want to add in, Dave, I think we talked about this at a couple of times. There was a story. My brother, he's like a weather enthusiast, so he's not going to get misled by anything, because I make sure he doesn't. But he was just perusing the internet one day, and he saw that same hurricane from Florida, but he told me it was showing a weird like the wrong picture, and it was showing the Cat 5 that had hit the previous year in Florida, instead of the actual storm which was approaching the west coast of Florida. And I was and this just media, same thing, newspaper, news outlets, social media, it all essentially boils down to what's going to sell best and what's going to sell better. That there's a Cat 3 hurricane, and it looks okay. It doesn't look super scary, but it's still dangerous, you know kind of storm. Or wow, there's a Cat 5 that's looks menacing, approaching the west coast of Florida, close enough to Tampa. Oh, look out. Which one of those is going to sell better? Of course the sensationalized one is going to sell better, because it'll scare people, and people be like, wow, oh no, there's a hurricane coming and I need to panic about this. Now, was there still a hurricane coming? Yes. So it wasn't completely false, but you're showing me an image that has nothing to do with the current storm. It's at the end of the day, it's just a little dishonest that they're trying to scare people, but that's what sells. And Dave, you and I talked about this at length. That's all that sells these days, and that's another part of our job, is that sometimes we have to go up against not just Cat 6 Florida woman, but we also have to go up against whatever news outlet of the day. I remember, I think it was Hurricane Matthew all those years ago. There was that Fox News host that's like, says, if this thing shifts 20 miles to the west, you and everyone you know is dead. That's just trying to scare people. It's ridiculous. That's not going to, the odds of you that I'm not going to get into too much of a tirade there, since I want to save a little bit of time. But you have to fight. Misinformation isn't going to just appear on social media. It's going to appear everywhere, and you have to be that voice of reason. Like Matt said, you have to get those hits in, those base hits, to use the baseball analogy. You have to get the base hits. Forget the walk-off home run. You'll certainly look cool that one day, but the fans will like you better if you're consistently getting on base. And that's the idea. If you're consistently correct, not 100% of the time, nobody's 100% correct all the time, but depending on what area you're forecasting in, and what time frame and everything, 75, 90% in that range. Probably, Matt might know a little bit better about the range percentages than I do, but you know, as long as you're reasonably correct and you provide reasonable information, people will start to trust you. And so that when you get somebody like a TikTok star or a Twitter influencer or a Fox News host spouting nonsense, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, oh, Matthew here says it's going to be not that bad. So I trust him because he's right 75% of the time. So these guys, I'm not going to listen to them. And then you saved that person, and hopefully whoever else, maybe that person tells a couple of people, and et cetera, et cetera. But you saved probably a couple of people at the very least a lot of either trouble or stress or whatever. So that's the whole point here. Now we have about 5 minutes left, so we won't be able to get to the last question. We've kind of hit on it already. What can we better do to communicate with the public so they aren't as misled? So I'll open it up to the students if there's any questions you have about anything we've discussed, or any kind of questions about weather misinformation in general. Like I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but if you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot, or Dave, if you have any comments or questions too, or Matt or Dr. Decker, if you have any comments as well. If there's no questions, then.
Well, I would just, yeah, definitely what Michael said, and the only thing I would add, if you want to quickly, anyone interject in terms of how we can better communicate, I think that was sort of where we're going to finish. Ideas after all this, or maybe you already have ideas, and this goes for the panelists, but the students too. What can we do to improve upon, the communications? I would say, yeah, feel free to make your views known. And if the students don't have any, maybe, Dr. Decker or Matt.
So yeah, I've been sort of mulling this over, and again, I'm not a big social media user or Twitter user, but I know, Mastodon exists, and decentralized social networks seems to maybe be the next thing. And so I'm wondering if there's a place for a neutral organization like the American Meteorological Society to run their own Mastodon server or some other equivalent kind of thing. And then right when you run your server, you have the power. It's no longer Elon Musk that decides who gets to post and who doesn't get to post. It's AMS, right? And so you could, the society, the collective group of meteorologists that are the American Meteorological Society, could decide who are the trustworthy voices that get to post on this server and who doesn't get to post on the server, and then point people to that location for weather information, because it's going to be reliable. You can still find good stuff elsewhere, but if you want to be sort of guaranteed that you're going to find only good stuff, come look at the AMS's Mastodon server, something like that. I know it's kind of pie in the sky at this point, but I'm trying to think of how we might sort of work our way through our current state of the world in this topic. So maybe there's a place for the AMS or some collective organization to get involved in that way.
And I think we're going to see a lot of research into this topic over the next few years, because I think, we've been dealing with this in weather for years, like years. This has been a problem really since Facebook's inception, or since Facebook started creating pages. And I think after the 2020 election, 2016 election, like there's been this focus on misinformation in news. And so that's where I think we're going to see more research money funneled into, better understanding what causes it, how to counteract it and everything. And that's not to say that all the solutions are going to work for weather. But, it's nice to know that at least there's going to be people that are kind of experts on these topics looking into it a little bit more, in the coming years, and they'll hopefully give us at least a few answers for things. But yeah, I mean, like really the best advice I can give people is to just be consistent. If you consistently produce a good product, you will consistently have a viewership, a readership, an audience, whatever. And I think that is really the key. If you're a student, and that's, don't necessarily view that as, just on social media, but that's in your workplace. If you run a blog at your TV station, it doesn't matter who your audience is. Your product is the work that you produce for that company, that TV station, that agency, whatever it is. As long as you are consistently doing your best and rational and even keeled, you're going to find growth. And it may not be, it's not going to be super growth, but it's going to be more linear growth, right? And that's the best you can hope for, I think, in this field, and that's where the best people end up shining.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was wondering, just your professional's opinions, do you think there's a better way that meteorologists can put out information to the general public as to what exactly we do and how we get the results that we get to make a forecast or make a climatological uh, statement? Because in the past year alone, the amount of people who have came up to me as skeptics talking about how meteorologists are pretty much bought by some government entity to perpetuate the idea of global warming or climate change, or that airplanes are cloud seeding. The list goes on and on. And I truly believe it just comes from a place of ignorance and not knowing what exactly we do. So I'm wondering, is there any way that we can put that information out there to teach the public, not just on forecast, but as to what the science of meteorology works?
Great question.
It's a good question. I guess I'll go first. I'm still waiting for my paycheck from big whoever to.
You know,
Yeah, big airplane. Yeah, it's actually funny you bring that up because I went and I talked to a group of kids at the Boys and Girls Club. Gosh, this was probably about 3 or 4 months ago now, and these are teenagers, and one of the I went representing my company. I was talking about kind of what I did. The first question I got was, why do airplanes spray stuff? And it shocked me. And I know that these are kids, these are not people that are, just completely deliberately coming up with these, things. So this is coming from a place of, as you said, kind of just general ignorance, and not, I don't want to say bad ignorance, just not knowing. And it's a huge problem. So it does start with education. Now, from a weather forecast perspective, it's hard because people just want to know. They just want to know, what does it mean? What's going to happen? What are the impacts? They don't have time to care about a science lesson, right, when they're trying to figure that out. So my answer to this question is, I don't know. I don't know how you combat that, other than sort of, maybe doing stuff during the quiet times where you can, show people, like, here's how we do this. Here's what we're looking at, and just lay everything out there. But again, you're expecting people to take time to want to learn. So it's a two-way thing. Like, they have to be willing to want to learn. And, if you're willing to give the time, then that's great. But it's absolutely a challenge. So, I think the most important thing that absolutely has to be done is just continuing to educate people at a young age about certain things, so that they grow up, understanding that certain things are bedrock facts, and there's no, ambiguity about them. But yeah, I don't know. I guess weather's always been one of those things that's just been mystifying to people, and it seems to produce, these weird theories about stuff. And it seems like it's been that way for ages. So, this is maybe just a long-rooted psychological human problem that we have, and combating it is not going to be easy. But anything we can try, I think everyone's all ears.
That kind of reminds me of, I have not read the entire Meteorologica, but certainly not in the original Greek either. But if you actually look at that, it's like 95% just made up stuff, right? It's not, none of it is right, but it's what people thought 2,500 years ago about how the weather and atmosphere works. So.
Yeah, and then I echo essentially what Matt said. That it all starts with education, because it's a little blurry now because it's been a while. But back when I was in elementary and high school, I think the only real mention in elementary school, the only real mention of any kind of weather related anything was, I want to say, like maybe like a 1-day science lesson when they were going through the water cycle or whatever, hydrological cycle or whatever. And then in high school, the one class I was looking forward to where they were going to talk about weather, the teacher just straight skipped it. And it was one of the most disappointing days in my entire junior year. Maybe it was my senior year. I don't remember anymore. But it starts and ends with education. If there are some people that you can tell them, you can show them the facts right in front of you, and they still won't believe it no matter what. Sometimes there's some people you can't help everybody, and that's something you kind of have to accept, that sometimes there are people that just want to be ignorant, but we're not trying to help those people is like trying to take down a brick wall with a plastic spoon. You're not going to be able to really do that. But for but overall education, especially in the early years, in elementary school, and especially in high school, getting that kind of foundation where they kind of they explain essentially that all the misinformation, because a simple let's say 2 classes in high school would probably be enough to explain away most of that stuff. It partially, at least, anyway. If you want to get really complicated, maybe not, but um, essentially, yeah, education. And if you want to, if you want more of a now solution, back to what we said earlier, where again with the baseball analogy, get onto those same social media platforms, or if it's at if you're having that problem at campus, tell those people, try to point them towards weather watchers. I think that's still a thing over there, right? Weather watchers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I sorry. I need to. I guess we'll end it there. We can continue. Yeah. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Decker and Matt for being part of today's panel. I thought you guys had a lot of great points. And we will post the recording to our various social media outlets, of course, for those that wish to view it again or didn't get